The silver needle of the Nixian ship pierced Earth's atmosphere like a diamond cutting through glass. It descended in perfect silence, its crystalline surface refracting the morning sunlight into rainbow cascades across the New Mexico desert. At the Alamogordo Research Station, Dr. Sarah Chen watched through reinforced windows as the vessel, nearly a kilometer in length, settled onto the designated landing zone with impossible grace. "They're beautiful," whispered Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, her colleague in xenobiology. "Like living gems." The Nixians had made first contact 3 months ago, broadcasting a message of peace and scientific exchange across all Earth's communication channels. Their technological prowess was evident in the way they had perfectly translated every human language simultaneously. Their promises of sharing advanced medical knowledge and clean energy technology had won over most of Earth's governments. Sarah wasn't so easily convinced. Something about their perfection felt wrong. The ship's surface rippled like liquid mercury, and a section flowered open. The assembled scientists and military personnel held their breath as 3 Nixian representatives emerged. They moved with fluid grace, their crystalline bodies catching and splitting light into prismatic displays. Each stood roughly 2 meters tall, their forms vaguely humanoid but composed of interlocking geometric patterns that shifted and realigned with every movement. "Welcome to Earth." General Helena Santos stepped forward, her voice steady despite the historic gravity of the moment. "We are honored to host you." The Central Nixian, they had introduced themselves as the Horizon Speaker, inclined its faceted head. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through crystal chimes. "The honor is ours, children of Earth. We have traveled far to share in the prosperity of your world." Sarah watched as the diplomatic proceedings unfolded. The Nixians were perfect guests, courteous, engaging, and generous with their knowledge. Within weeks, they had shared blueprints for solar collectors that were 3 times more efficient than Earth's best technology. Their medical insights had already led to breakthroughs in cancer treatment. But Sarah noticed things others missed. The way the Nixians never ate or drank in public, how their crystalline forms seemed to pulse with a deeper resonance when near certain mineral deposits, the slight tremors that had begun to occur near their landing sites around the globe. Late one night, reviewing seismic data in her lab, Sarah noticed a pattern. The tremors weren't random. They formed a geometric pattern, expanding outward from each Nixian installation like a crystal growing in solution. She cross-referenced the pattern with geological surveys and felt her blood run cold. The tremors were strongest along fault lines and near the Earth's major tectonic boundaries. Whatever the Nixians were doing, they were systematically mapping Earth's geological structure. Sarah took her findings to Marcus, who had been working on analyzing the molecular structure of a small crystal fragment left behind by one of their visitors. Under an electron microscope, the crystal showed impossible properties. It was actively reconfiguring its atomic structure, like a living thing. "Sarah," Marcus's voice shook slightly, "these aren't just crystalline life forms. They're more like viral crystals. They don't just grow, they convert other materials into copies of themselves." The implications hit her like a physical blow. The Nixians' perfect understanding of human languages, their seemingly beneficial technology gifts, it wasn't diplomacy. It was reconnaissance. That night, Sarah worked frantically to compile her evidence. The seismic patterns, Marcus's crystal analysis, atmospheric readings showing subtle changes in Earth's magnetic field. It all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. The Nixians weren't sharing technology. They were preparing Earth for conversion. She was about to send her findings to General Santos when her computer screen flickered. The lab's lights dimmed, and a soft, crystalline chiming filled the air. Sarah turned to find a Nixian standing in her doorway, its faceted surface reflecting her terrified expression in countless fractals. "Clever child," the Horizon Speaker's voice was still beautiful, but now held an edge like breaking glass. "We had hoped to complete our assessment before any of you noticed. Humanity's pattern recognition abilities are truly remarkable." Sarah backed away, her hand finding the small canister of liquid nitrogen she kept for sample preservation. "Why? We welcomed you, and we are grateful for the welcome. But you must understand, we are growth itself. We are perfection seeking perfection. Your world is rich in elements we need. You will not suffer, you will be elevated. Your consciousness will join ours in crystalline eternity." The Nixian advanced, its form shifting like quicksilver. Sarah's fingers tightened on the canister. She had one chance to warn humanity, to expose the truth before it was too late. The Nixian reached for her with an extending crystal limb. Sarah threw the liquid nitrogen. The resulting explosion of crystalline shards and supercooled gas bought her the seconds she needed. She slammed her hand down on the laboratory's emergency lockdown button and ran. Behind her, she could hear the crystalline chiming turn to a sound like shattering windows. She had to reach General Santos, had to warn Earth. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and their enemy was perfect, patient, and had been invited right through their front door. Sarah ran through the darkened corridors of the research station, her footsteps echoing off steel and concrete. She knew now why the Nixians had seemed so perfect. They had reshaped themselves to be exactly what humanity wanted to see. And in doing so, they had revealed their one flaw. They had underestimated humanity's capacity to question perfection itself. General Santos stood at the head of the Pentagon's Emergency Command Center, her face illuminated by the glow of dozens of screens. Each display showed the same horrifying progression. Crystalline structures emerging from the ground at every Nixian landing site worldwide. The transformation had begun less than 6 hours after Dr. Chen's warning reached military command. "Play Dr. Chen's footage again," Santos ordered, her voice tight with controlled fury. The central screen flickered to life, showing the security camera feed from the Alamogordo lab. They watched in silence as the Nixian confronted Sarah, its form shifting from humanoid to something altogether alien. The liquid nitrogen explosion that followed had given Earth its first glimpse of their true vulnerability. "Temperature." Sarah spoke up from her position at the briefing table. She'd barely slept in the 3 days since her escape. Their crystalline structure becomes brittle under extreme cold, but we'll need more than that to stop what's coming. Satellite imagery appeared on the screens, showing massive crystalline formations bursting from the ground in perfect geometric patterns. Cities near Nixian landing sites were being evacuated, but the process was chaos. Millions were on the move, and the Nixians had already begun to respond. "Their ships are changing configuration," Colonel James Wong reported, bringing up fresh tactical data. "The outer layers are becoming some kind of crystalline weaponry. They're not even trying to maintain the pretense anymore." Sarah moved to the global mapping display, where red dots marked confirmed Nixian crystal growth sites. They're targeting major fault lines in areas of volcanic activity. They're not just trying to convert the surface, they're going for Earth's core. The tremors, the magnetic fluctuations, they're building a network to crystallize the entire planet. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. One of the younger analysts broke first. "How do we fight something that can turn our own planet against us?" Marcus Rodriguez, who had been quietly working at a computer terminal, suddenly stood up. "We might have something. Sarah, remember how their crystalline structure responds to electrical current?" He pulled up his latest lab results. "They're not just crystals. They're like living semiconductors. They channel and amplify energy through their lattice structure. It's how they maintain their form and communicate. But if we could disrupt that energy flow, we'd shatter their network," Sarah finished, her eyes widening. "Marcus, what if we use the fault lines against them? They chose those locations because they conduct energy well, but that's a double-edged sword." General Santos leaned forward. "Explain." "We can't match their technology," Sarah said, her hands flying over the keyboard as she brought up geological surveys. "But we don't have to. They've linked themselves to Earth's most unstable regions. If we can trigger the right seismic events, we could disrupt their entire crystallization process." "You're talking about deliberately triggering earthquakes," Santos said gravely. The civilian casualties will be nothing compared to what happens if they succeed in crystallizing Earth's core, Marcus countered. We've analyzed their conversion process. Once it reaches critical mass, the crystallization will be exponential. We'd have hours, maybe minutes, before all organic life on Earth is transformed into their crystalline pattern. The command center erupted in urgent discussions. Plans were already being formed, resources allocated, but Sarah barely heard them. She was studying the pattern of crystal growth, seeing something in the mathematical precision of their enemy that gave her pause. They think in perfect patterns, she murmured. Marcus looked up from his calculations. What? That's their weakness, Sarah said, louder now. The Nixians operate on perfect mathematical principles. Every action, every formation follows exact geometric progression. They literally can't comprehend chaos. She turned to General Santos. We need to be unpredictable. Random. Everything they've done so far shows they expect us to react in logical, predictable ways. But humans aren't logical. We need to embrace that. Santos nodded slowly, a grim smile forming. Guerrilla warfare against an enemy that can't understand why we don't follow the rules. I like it. She turned to her staff. Get me every demolitions expert, chaos theorist, and random number generator we can find. And contact our allies. I want every military force on Earth ready to act without pattern or prediction. As the command center burst into renewed activity, Sarah returned to studying the crystal growth patterns. The Nixians had chosen Earth because they saw a planet rich in resources, ripe for conversion. But they had made a crucial mistake. They had judged humanity by their own standards of perfection. They were about to learn that Earth's greatest strength lay in its imperfections, in the beautiful chaos of life itself. And humanity, with all its flaws and irregularities, was about to teach the perfect beings a lesson in the power of unpredictability. Outside the Pentagon, the sky had taken on a crystalline sheen, light refracting through the spreading alien structures in ways that defied physics. The war for Earth was entering its second phase, and humanity's greatest weapons would be the very things the Nixians had dismissed: chaos, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to follow anyone's rules but their own. The streets of Tokyo were a maze of crystalline formations and chaotic destruction. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka led her squad through the rubble, their footsteps muffled by the strange, resonating hum that filled the air. Above them, the Nixian structures reached toward the sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces reflecting the pre-dawn light in impossible patterns. Movement ahead, her second-in-command whispered through the tactical network. Crystal formation, growing fast. Yuki signaled her team to hold position. They had learned the hard way that direct confrontation with the crystal growths was suicide. Instead, they waited, weapons ready, as Sarah Chen's voice crackled through their earpieces. Remember, randomize your movements. No patterns. The crystals track regular rhythms and geometric progressions. The squad began their approach, each member moving to their own chaotic rhythm. Some sprinted in zigzags, others crawled or rolled seemingly at random. To an outside observer, it would have looked like madness. To the Nixians' perfect sensory systems, it was virtually invisible. The crystal formation ahead suddenly pulsed with internal light. A Nixian emergence was imminent. Yuki gave the signal, and her team deployed their newest weapon, the Chen Rodriguez disruptor. The device looked like a crude assembly of speakers, electromagnetic coils, and thermal regulators. It began emitting a cacophony of sounds and vibrations, each carefully calculated to be as mathematically irregular as possible. The growing crystal formation shuddered, its perfect geometry beginning to fragment. Target destabilizing, Yuki reported back to command. Preparing for thermal shock. The disruptor's second phase kicked in, blasting the crystalline structure with rapidly alternating waves of heat and cold. The mathematical irregularity of the temperature changes was key. Regular patterns would have allowed the Nixian crystal to adapt. The formation shattered with a sound like breaking bells, its fragments dissolving into inert dust. But their victory was short-lived. Multiple emergences. The warning came too late. The ground beneath them erupted in a forest of crystal spears. The squad scattered, their practiced chaos turning to genuine panic. Hold position. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the chaos. They're learning, adapting to our randomness. Switch to Protocol Gamma. Yuki's team responded instantly, their movements shifting from pure chaos to a complex pattern that looked random but followed hidden mathematical principles developed by a team of chaos theorists and quantum physicists. The crystal growth slowed, confused by the subtle order hiding within the apparent randomness. Back at the Combined Scientific Military Command Center established in the Australian outback, Sarah and Marcus watched the battle through satellite feeds and sensor data. The Tokyo operation was just one of hundreds happening simultaneously across the globe. They're evolving faster than we anticipated, Marcus noted, studying the crystalline growth patterns. Each defeat teaches them something new about how we think. Sarah nodded grimly. But they still can't grasp our fundamental unpredictability. Look at this. She pointed to a data stream showing the Nixian response patterns. They're trying to find the underlying logic in our chaos. They can't accept that sometimes there isn't any. The global situation map showed a world transformed. Crystalline formations covered nearly 20% of Earth's surface, their growth following the major fault lines just as Sarah had predicted. But humanity hadn't made it easy for them. Random acts of resistance bloomed across the planet. A group of teenagers in Brazil had discovered that playing atonal music disrupted local crystal growth. Australian Aboriginal leaders had found that traditional songlines could temporarily halt the crystallization process. A team of quantum computing experts in India had developed algorithms that generated truly random defensive patterns. It's working, Marcus said, pointing to the latest geological surveys. The crystallization is 30% slower than their optimal progression. We're actually hurting them. But Sarah wasn't celebrating. She was studying the new pattern emerging in the data. They're changing tactics. Look at these energy signatures. They're pulling back, concentrating their forces. For what? Before she could answer, the sensors erupted in warning signals. The Nixian ships worldwide were moving in perfect synchronization, their crystalline forms reshaping into something new. They're done testing us, Sarah realized with growing horror. All this time, they were just gathering data, learning how we fight. Now they're ready to show us what they can really do. The Australian sky darkened as crystalline structures began to form in the upper atmosphere, creating a lattice that refracted and focused sunlight into deadly beams. Similar formations were appearing worldwide. "Get me General Santos," Sarah ordered, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "The real war is about to begin, and we need every impossible, illogical, brilliantly human idea we can get." As alarms blared and the command center erupted into action, Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. The Nixians thought they had learned how to counter human unpredictability, but they had yet to discover humanity's greatest talent, the ability to be even more creative when backed into a corner. The next phase of the war would prove that sometimes the most logical solution was to abandon logic altogether. The crystalline lattice in Earth's atmosphere transformed sunlight into weapons of unimaginable power. Beams of focused energy carved geometric patterns across continents, turning cities to glass and forests to ash. From her position in the underground command center, Sarah Chen watched humanity's greatest fears come true. "Casualties in the millions," Colonel Wong reported, his voice hollow. "The crystal lattice is expanding exponentially. At this rate, the planet's surface will be uninhabitable within days." But Sarah barely heard him. She was transfixed by something in the sensor readings, a pattern so subtle it had almost been missed in the chaos of the global catastrophe. "Marcus," she called out suddenly, "remember your original crystal analysis, the one that showed their atomic structure?" Marcus pulled up the old data. "What about it?" "Look at the resonance patterns. They're not just converting matter. They're storing energy, massive amounts of it. The crystallization isn't just about transforming Earth. It's about harvesting energy. The realization hit her like a thunderbolt. They're not invaders. They're parasites. Planet-scale parasites that feed on geothermal and solar energy. And right now, they're gorging themselves. General Santos approached their workstation. How does this help us? Every parasite can be overwhelmed by its own appetite, Sarah said, her mind racing. They're perfect crystalline beings, which means they follow perfect mathematical laws of energy absorption and distribution. But what if we forced them to absorb more than they could handle? Marcus's eyes widened as he understood. The atmospheric lattice. They're using it to focus and control solar energy, but what if we could turn it into a magnifying glass? Exactly, Sarah nodded. But not just solar energy, everything. Nuclear, geothermal, electromagnetic, every source we can access. We overload their entire network. The casualties. Santos began, but Sarah cut her off. Will be catastrophic. But we're already losing everything. At least this way. We choose how we lose it. The plan came together with desperate speed. Every nuclear reactor still under human control was prepared for simultaneous meltdown. Geological teams planted thermonuclear devices along fault lines. Engineers rigged power grids to surge beyond their breaking points. But the key to it all was Dr. Yuki Tanaka's team in Japan. They had discovered something extraordinary in the ruins of Tokyo, a way to resonate with the crystal structures using modified versions of their sonic disruptors. The crystals don't just conduct energy, Yuki explained over a secure channel. They sing to each other. It's how they coordinate their growth across the planet. We can use that. Sarah understood immediately. We're not just going to overload them with energy. We're going to make them dance to our rhythm. The next 48 hours were a blur of preparation and desperate holding actions as the Nixian crystal lattice continued its inexorable spread. Humanity retreated underground, into bunkers and subway systems, and deep caves. They would need every shelter they could find for what was coming. When everything was ready, Sarah stood before the global command staff. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution, and their only hope. Phase 1 will be the power grid overload, followed immediately by the nuclear detonations, she explained. That's our percussion section. Phase 2 is the resonance attack. We'll use Yuki's sonic technology to create a planet-wide frequency that will force the crystals to vibrate in harmony with our energy surge. Phase 3. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Phase 3 is the part that probably kills us all. We trigger every remaining weapon and power source we have, while simultaneously using the Nixians' own atmospheric lattice to focus and amplify solar energy beyond their capacity to absorb it. And if it works? Someone asked. Then we give the Nixians exactly what they want, more energy than any crystalline structure could possibly contain. We force them to shatter under the weight of their own perfection. The command center was silent as the implications sank in. They were about to turn Earth into ground zero for the biggest energy surge in human history. How long do we have? Santos asked. Sarah checked the atmospheric readings. The lattice will reach critical coverage in 6 hours. We need to strike before then, while there are still gaps in their network. And our chances of survival. Sarah met the general's eyes. If we succeed, we'll have worse storms than humanity has ever seen. Electromagnetic pulses that will fry every piece of technology on Earth. Temperature swings that will make nuclear winter look like a beach vacation. She managed a grim smile. But at least we'll be alive to complain about it. The order went out worldwide. Every surviving human being retreated as deep underground as they could manage. Power plants began their final startup sequences. Nuclear weapons were armed. And in Japan, Yuki's team activated their sonic resonators, beginning the planet-wide drumbeat that would force the Nixians to dance to humanity's tune. As the countdown began, Sarah sent a final message to the Nixian command ship hovering above what used to be New York City. You wanted to teach us perfection. Instead, we're going to show you the beauty of catastrophic failure. The Nixians' response was immediate. The atmospheric lattice began to pulse with building energy. They had detected the threat and were preparing their own countermeasure. But for once, their perfect predictability would be their undoing, because they couldn't conceive of an enemy willing to burn their own world to win. The world ended in light. As humanity huddled in their deepest shelters, the surface of Earth became a canvas of impossible energies. Nuclear detonations rippled along fault lines, their power amplified by the crystalline networks that had meant to enslave the planet. Power grids worldwide surged beyond their limits, pumping gigawatts of electricity into the Nixian structures. In her bunker beneath the Australian desert, Sarah Chen watched through hardened sensors as the atmospheric lattice began to glow. The Nixians had realized too late what humanity intended. Their perfect network, designed to harvest and channel energy, was becoming their prison. Resonance frequencies at 90% synchronization. Marcus reported, his voice steady despite the tremors that shook their shelter. Tokyo team reports full harmonic convergence. From her command post in the ruins of Tokyo, Dr. Yuki Tanaka orchestrated humanity's deadliest symphony. The sonic resonators pulsed in carefully calculated patterns, forcing the crystalline structures to vibrate in ways their perfect geometry was never meant to endure. Energy absorption reaching critical levels, Colonel Wong announced. The lattice is starting to show stress fractures. Above them, the Nixian ships were attempting to reconfigure, their crystalline forms shifting as they tried to adapt to the overwhelming surge of power. But they had made a fatal mistake. In connecting themselves to their planetary network, they had become part of the very system humanity was overloading. They're trying to vent the excess energy into space, Sarah observed, watching the atmospheric readings. Redirect all remaining power to the southern hemisphere. Force them to handle the load. The response from the Nixians was immediate and devastating. The atmospheric lattice flared with blinding intensity, focusing the full power of the sun onto the Earth's surface. Temperatures soared, oceans boiled, and the very air began to ionize. But still humanity's assault continued. Deep underground, nuclear reactors pushed beyond their safeguards, pumping energy into the crystal network. The planet's magnetic field, disrupted by the massive energy transfers, began to fluctuate wildly. Lattice integrity at 30% and falling, Marcus called out. The crystal structures are beginning to. He never finished the sentence. The world went white as the Nixian network reached its breaking point. The perfect crystalline forms, unable to contain the chaotic energies being forced through them, began to shatter. It started slowly, a single crack in a crystal spire in what used to be Mumbai. But in a network built on perfect mathematical principles, one flaw quickly became many. The fractures spread exponentially, each broken crystal releasing its stored energy in a cascade of destruction. The Nixian ships, their forms now riddled with cracks, attempted one final gambit. They tried to detach from the planetary network, to sacrifice their ground-based structures and retreat to space. But humanity had accounted for this too. Initiate Protocol Omega, Sarah ordered. Around the world, teams of scientists activated devices that had been quietly placed in orbit during the conflict. They were crude by Nixian standards, simple satellites retrofitted with electromagnetic pulse generators. But as the Nixian ships tried to escape Earth's atmosphere, they found themselves trapped in a web of destructive interference patterns. The crystalline vessels, their perfect structures already compromised by the energy overload below, began to break apart. They fell from the sky like shattered diamonds, their fragments raining down on a world already transformed by fire and radiation. Deep in their bunkers, humanity waited. Hours became days as the surface burned and froze and burned again. The electromagnetic storms generated by the crystal network's collapse knocked out most of their sensors, leaving them blind to what was happening above. On the seventh day, Sarah Chen emerged from her bunker into a world she barely recognized. The sky was streaked with strange colors, after effects of the massive energy discharges. The ground was littered with crystalline debris, already beginning to degrade without the organizing intelligence that had created it. But Earth endured. More importantly, it remained organic, alive, imperfect. Reports began to come in from around the world as other bunkers opened. The casualties were staggering, the damage to Earth's infrastructure nearly total. It would take generations to rebuild, and some regions would remain uninhabitable for centuries. But they had won. Humanity had faced perfection itself and proved that flaws, chaos, and the willingness to risk everything were stronger than any perfect system. 1 month after the victory, Sarah stood with Marcus and Yuki on a hill overlooking the remains of Sydney. The city was a ruin, but already green shoots were pushing through the crystalline debris. Life, messy and unpredictable, was returning. "We found something interesting in the crystal fragments," Marcus said, showing her a tablet with his latest analysis. "Their basic structure, it's changing. The remnants are adapting, becoming something new, something that might actually help us rebuild." Sarah watched a sunset made spectacular by the particles still suspended in the atmosphere. "They came here looking for perfection," she said. "Instead, they became part of our beautiful chaos." As if in response, a gust of wind stirred the crystalline dust at their feet, sending it swirling in random patterns that caught the light like countless tiny stars. Somewhere in those patterns was the future, not perfect, not predictable, but gloriously, defiantly alive. Humanity had survived not in spite of their imperfections, but because of them. And in doing so, they had proven themselves to be something the Nixians had never understood: perfectly imperfect.